So in this special edition Fireside Chat, I wanted to introduce the guest, Karen Hutchings. Karen is the head of travel, meetings and events at Ernst & Young. Before that, she held various roles in travel at AIG, Citi, and Merrill Lynch. Karen was also the chair of the board for ITM, the Institute of Travel Management, for 3 years. Karen has received numerous accolades, including recently the Lifetime Achievement Awards at the GPTA WinIt. She was the BTN Travel Manager of the Year in 2015 and 2018. 2022 Business Travel Hall of Fame, and many other accolades. So, Karen, other than this fantastic, illustrious career, she has also run 26 marathons. In Istanbul, in Bangkok, in the US, in Australia. So today, over the next 20 minutes or so, we're going to celebrate Karen and her career in business travel so far, and then learn from her directly how she transformed her vision to success in sustainability to blockchain. We'll also learn more about tech trends and what's shaping macroeconomics in 2024. Please join me to welcome Karen to the stage. So Karen, actually, my first question was not this. So this is the clicker. Karen, this is your first AltoVita event.
It is, yeah.
May I ask, what is your impression so far?
I should have come before. For sure. And by the way, those photos, I am now twice the size of those pictures that were up there of me marathon running. I just want to put that out there. That's what happens when you get older, I guess, and you don't stop marathon running. But no, it's fantastic, and what a great location as well. Yeah, wonderful.
Amazing. Well, Karen, in your interview with the ITM, I believe, was a 60-second interview, you mentioned that if you had a magic wand, you would end animal cruelty. And that's why I think it's worthwhile to bring Brian and Bobby on stage. Can you share with us what your vision is in perhaps ending this animal cruelty in the future?
Oh, wow. I mean, gosh, it's so difficult, isn't it? I guess, you know, for me, every animal I have, and there are many, they're all rescues. And the one thing that everybody can do is stop going to breeders as an example to get animals from breeders, because there is always animals somewhere that needs a home. So if we could even get people doing that to start off with, that would make a difference. But yeah, it's just something I'm very passionate about. And as I go on to my new chapter next year, and it's funny that you talked about India, but I'm getting directly involved in a dog sanctuary in India, actually, in Goa. I thought it was a nice place to pick, quite frankly. It could have been Battersea, but Goa sounds much more appealing to me. But yeah, it's something I'm passionate about, and these two are two examples of rescues that I've got.
How did you rescue Brian?
Male goats that are neutered, shall we say, aren't very much in demand for anything apart from food. And so that's what he would have been if I didn't take him. And he's turned out to be more famous than me, quite frankly, because he appears on everything that I'm involved with now. So, but if you've never owned a goat, then it's definitely a pet worth having, because I had no idea how much fun a goat could be until I got him. And he's brilliant. Yeah, absolutely brilliant.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Karen.
You see, that's it. That's what happens, you know. He's more famous.
Thank you, Karen. My husband and I would love to have a dog. We don't have one currently. We have an imaginary one. So in the future, we might consider a goat. So moving on to career. Karen, obviously, you had such a big career and still are delving into many different aspects of maybe technology in the future. So what have been the 3 main highlights of your career so far?
It's so hard when you get asked that question. I think EY is definitely a major highlight for me. I've been there 11 years, and what was very fortunate being at EY was the access to the intelligence that we got. So when it comes to like technology type things, and we have access to many people that are experts in blockchain or in AI. Our latest one is ChatGPT that we're about to launch shortly in the team. So I think EY is most definitely a highlight. But then I'll take it back to the start of Swissair. And I remember when I studied, I did languages and travel and tourism, and I wanted to work for the best airline. And at that time, Swissair was the best airline. It was the last airline to get rid of first class, and it was all around service. And so definitely Swissair is a real highlight for me, because that really taught me about how important service is. And I think for us in the industry now, when we think about how we're relying on technology to do things for us, there still has to be people at the core, and there still has to be people delivering whatever it is. And then the next one I would say would probably be my time at Merrill Lynch. That gave me the opportunity to live in the US. I lived in New York, was probably one of the first Brits to head up as a global head of travel for a US investment bank. And which I remember, there was a Wall Street benchmarking group in the US, and apparently all of the other members had to take a vote for whether I could become a member of it. And that's like, the last I looked, Merrill Lynch was a US investment bank, so why the hell do I have to go through a vote? But it was actually because I was not American getting into that. And so it did cause quite a stir at the time. But I think those three would be my highlights. And maybe there's more highlights to come, you know, maybe that's going to happen next year, who knows? But the industry itself is a highlight for me. Meetings and events and travel is second to none in my humble opinion. And it's what I'm very passionate about for sure.
Well, thank you. So we're going to discuss more about sustainability, blockchain, and AI. But before that, let's talk about numbers. I threw out a lot of numbers right there. So let's get the perspective from you, Karen. Pre-COVID, you managed $2.1 billion in travel spend and $400 million in meetings and travel. What was the spend like this year, and where do you predict 2024 going to be?
So our recovery's come back to 1.3 billion T&E, and our meetings and events spend is around 300 million, and that is exactly where we want it to be. The chairman went out with a very, very stringent target that we would reduce our emissions by 70%. No, we didn't say that at all. We said we're going to reduce our emissions by 35%. 70% of that 35% comes from business travel. So there was no way we ever wanted to go back to the 2.2 billion spend. And so the 1.3 is actually where we want it to be, because that means we're on track to deliver the emissions reduction. From a meetings and events perspective, what we've seen is a swing to virtual. So whereas there may have been 4 particular meetings a year, 2 would be virtual, 2 in person, whereas they would all be in person before. And we're happy with that as well. I think if we're serious about delivering to our target, which by the way is 2025, so it's a very aggressive target versus many companies out there talking about 2030, and COP's on at the moment, and there's 2030, there's 2050 being discussed. For us to set that commitment for 2025, we had to take significant action very quickly, hence why we're never going to go back to 2019. In fact, I hate hearing anybody comparing to 2019, because we actually shouldn't. If we're serious about what we want to do prior to there being enough sustainable aviation fuel out there, then we cannot refer back to 2019.
Well, then how do you feel about this chart from GBTA, essentially suggesting that by 2024, at the end of 2024, we will be back at pre-pandemic level?
It makes me laugh. In January, I can give you a very different view than what I will do whilst I'm still at EY. However, I really don't... The challenge that you have in something like GBTA is they are focused on business travel, and it's in their absolute interest to see it grow all the time. For me, it needs to be growing in a controlled manner. And if we just carry on growing without putting pressure on the airlines, for the oil companies to make more SAF, then we're not doing by right of the planet. That's the reality of it. And so, you know, SAF represents under 1% of aviation fuel at the moment. That is ridiculous and embarrassing, to be honest, and that's a whole global problem. And so for me, they shouldn't be publishing this type of thing. They should be publishing more a graph around the production of SAF and what the impact of that would have.
Well, moving on to, or carrying forward to the sustainability conversation, Karen, and there is going to be a sustainability panel later on, so I'm very excited to learn more about it. Your vision to success included sustainability, and also that's why you were celebrated as well as recent as yesterday as the one of the 25 most influential figures in business travel. And that is a lot to do with the tool that you worked on called STAT, so Sustainable Travel Approval Tool, which was co-developed with IBM. First launched in the US in 2022. Since then has been rolled out to 41 different countries. How did this idea originate? And what were the key challenges and how did you manage to overcome them?
It was interesting. It came from a conversation when there was a publication about what a particular company had done with IBM on sustainability, and my boss forwarded it to me and said, why aren't we doing something similar? And I already had an idea of something that I felt we needed in the industry. So I spoke to IBM then and said, you've developed this with this company and I want to know more about it. What came out of that is actually that tool was never developed. It was an awful lot of hype, but it actually hadn't gone anywhere. But I was then on a call with this person from IBM, and I just said to them about this idea that I had around how we could take away travel approval away from price and put it squarely onto emissions. And so we had this conversation. I got our alliance partner involved from EY, and suddenly that idea then became a reality. And so we did what the equivalent, they call at IBM a garage, which is like a brainstorm session. So I brought 3 or 4 of my team members together with myself. We did this whole session with IBM. We then got I had to go internally to get funding because it wasn't cheap to develop, I have to say. But we positioned it in such a way, because the reality is when your chairman is going out making statements of how we're going to reduce emissions, 70% comes from business travel. We had to have a seat at the table and come up with ways of how can we change that behaviour. And so actually when we presented the proof of concept to what's called the Strategic Investment Group internally, we got the funding approved and then we moved forward. So we developed it actually during the pandemic. So it was a 6-month sprint, which for anybody that knows me, 6 months, in my view, is not a sprint. That seemed to be an awful long time to do something. But I guess the great thing about, you have an idea, but when you don't actually understand how the technology works, then you can make decisions thinking it could be much quicker. But we did it all remotely. We did it all virtually with the IBM team, and then ended up with a tool that we have now. But what's been amazing about it is the influence and impact it's had on employees. So the difference that we've seen, Poland as an example, where there's high rail. We saw rail usage increase to 60% from 20%, because one of the things that we drive in that tool is around changing the behaviour of not flying if rail is a viable option. And we've seen globally our rail increase, I think it's a 23% now from 15%, which when you were having 3 million air tickets issued a year, it sort of gives you the impact. And we're actually live now in 55 countries. Wow. There's countries being rolled out all the time with it. But it squarely takes away the approval from price. It does have price in there as well, but it's very tangible as well, so it's relatable, and that's the key thing with this. Somebody will say to me that it's 20 kilos of carbon. Well, what the hell does 20 kilos of carbon mean? I was really excited when we purchased 25,000 gallons of sustainable aviation fuel. I thought, my God, we're solving all the world problems. That is a one-way flight from London to New York.
Wow.
Just to put it into perspective. And I think the key thing is with the tool, though, it actually makes it relatable. So, for example, if you take the train from London to Paris versus flying, it would take a tree 6 years to grow to offset the emissions of flying on that. And this is the type of information that this tool brings forward. And so it was an exciting thing to be involved with for many of us in the team, because it was one idea, but then to build it out and now see the impact of it. And we're actually selling it to clients now. So we've got our first client signed up to buy it as well, which is fantastic.
And it started with flights, obviously, because flights is the majority of the contributor in carbon emission. But it was also rolled out to hotels.
Yeah, at the minute we are only taking averages of hotels, but we are speaking to a partner that's very strong in this space. And then we're hoping to be able to bring much more granular information on hotels so that people can make informed decisions on that as well. Because the key thing is once people are armed with information, they can make the right choice. If they don't have that information, though, they can't make that right choice because they're not informed. But I think as well it has to be tangible to understand, if I stay in this hotel versus this one, what are the things that will make a difference? How many mobile phone charges is it? How many houses is it being lit? Make it real. And so when we get that for the hotels as well, we anticipate seeing swings of our employees as well.
And from an accommodation perspective, Karen, what are your views on the extended stay sector? And service apartment in general, what's going well and where do you think can be improved?
I think, when I think about 10 years ago, extended stay as to where it is now, it's much more mainstream for sure. And I think people actually, when you think about, when you think about when people are traveling longer and on longer trips, then the extended stay now becomes more of a first call. One of the interesting things that we had actually was a lot of people got pets, myself included, but I had them before, in fairness, but during the pandemic. And what we found in the US, as an example, is people wanted to travel with their pets on business. Well, extended stays really lends itself to that as an example. And I think the one thing with extended stay is that it can be much more flexible than hotels in the fact that you've got less people potentially in the building, less views, less complaints. And so it makes it much more flexible. And I think that's a real key thing on extended stay, is that flexibility of how you can do things. And certainly we see that, and why our extended stay is increased because of just various different reasons that people had of wanting to stay there, as an example with a pet.
Other than flexibility, Karen, as you know, many of our audience are hospitality operators. Given that EY's average employee age is about 27 years old, very, very young, and your ambitious pledge to achieve zero net emission by 2025, 5 years earlier than many other enterprises, what are your advice for them? Where should they invest in 2024? What should be the must-have?
I mean, most definitely is the visibility of the data. The one thing for sure with a lot of hotels is that you don't get the visibility of the data. I think the platform that you have enables there to be much more visibility of the data, which is what it's about actually, because we have to report out. We're audited on what we're reporting out. And so if we get accurate data, that will make a huge difference to what we're able to be measured on. So I think that would be the number one thing for sure, because, we don't want to be audited and think then we've made a mistake, as an example. So I think that's a really key thing. And then I would also carry on with the flexibility, though, and try and behave differently to what everybody else does out there, whether you're relying on technology to deliver things. But that would be what I would talk to for the long stay.
Well, time is flying by. We've got a lot to cover yet. I think maybe just one last question, or two last questions, Karen, before we finish. I know we're running out of time. So moving on to blockchain. The tool was first created for EY employees in order for EY to attract talent. So it was empowering them for when they book leisure travel. So similar to my question before, what were the challenges and how did you overcome it? And how is the adoption so far?
So the blockchain solution we put in place was really to test the market and to challenge the industry. So, there's frustrations in general out there as to what the industry is doing. And I think we're held accountable or held to ransom, shall we say, by some technologies out there. So we wanted to prove that we could actually build an online booking tool that could be using technology, i.e. blockchain, to be able to direct connect to the airlines. So we did it with two particular airlines that wanted to support us on this, and it was for leisure. We've now actually gone live with corporate. So it's very well known out there of some of the airlines that have been removing content from the GDS. And so we've been able to solution that so that we still get access. We are about to go live with one hotel chain now on this. And it really is just to show the industry that we don't have to stay where we are, and we can look at things very differently and challenge ourselves. And the reason why there are so many startups coming up in technology space is because I think everybody feels that it's a little bit archaic. And so I never accept that there can be a challenge, because you just find a solution to it. And I think you've just got to keep on. And you're prime examples of that in setting up your own company here, that you had a vision and you decided you needed to build that because you saw a gap. That's exactly the same as what we've done. And I think it's too easy to accept what you get told by potential suppliers, that it can't be done because actually there is always a way around it. And that's certainly what we've always found. And so the one thing for sure as well is if it wasn't going to work, then stop it quickly. But at least start it in the first place to see whether you can get it to work. And we've done that with everything that we've built, whether it be the EY Stat tool, our internal TripAdvisor tool. There's all sorts of different things. And some of them we stop and say, you know what, people don't want to use it, fine, stop it. But where we want it to be used, and so for example, the fact that we're going to now go with a hotel chain on our direct connect, it's going to give us so much more from a project rate perspective that we can't get at the moment through the GDS, is a positive. It's a positive for our employees. It's a positive for our suppliers as well. And the key thing then, though, is it wakens the rest of the suppliers up to say, well, how do we get a part of that as well? Because obviously the chain that's going to be working with us is going to be at an advantage versus some of the other chains.
And finally, Karen, I think we must discuss for 30 seconds about AI. So can AI help us solve this archaic problem that we have with the GDS?
Definitely. It's a quick answer. I think that what we need, I think there's so much fear out there and it's so ridiculous. I mean, we're about to launch a ChatGPT solution, which we think is going to enhance our employees' travel experience massively. It's going to do things that we just don't have time to do. And I think that's the key thing. Everybody thinks that it's going to take jobs away. It's not. It's going to make jobs much more interesting, because the boring crap that you have to do, you don't have to do because you rely on technology to do it. But then also you can do so much more that you may not have the time to do, or you don't have the inclination to do. And also it can just make the experience for somebody so much better, because you can give them so much more information. I never ever thought that I'd be somebody talking about AI, ChatGPT and robotics. And I'm about to go and start working with a startup next year, which is quite incredible. But I think we have to embrace it, because it can do so much and it makes life so much more interesting.
Let's end on that note, shall we? Thank you so much, everyone.